The traditional form of anti-democratic government in European history was conservative authoritarianism. Leaders of such governments tried to prevent major changes that would undermine the existing social order. Authoritarian leaders depended on obedient bureaucracies, vigilant police departments, and trustworthy armies liberals, Democrats, and socialists prosecuted. The old-fashioned authoritarian government were occupied with the goal of mere survival and limited their demands to taxes, army recruits, and passive acceptance. Although some of the conservative authoritarian regimes adopted certain Hitlerian and fascist characteristics in the 1930s, their general aims were limited. They were more concerned with maintaining the status quo when forcing society into rapid change of war. This tradition was continued into our own time. Another example of conservative authoritarianism was newly independent Poland, where democratic governments was overturned in 1926 when General Joseph Piłsudski established a military dictatorship. Pilsudski silenced opposition and tried to build a strong state. Supporters were army, major industrialists, and nationalists. Yet another example of conservative authoritarianism was Portugal in Western Europe. By the spring 1921, after Lenin and the Bolsheviks had won the civil war in southern Russia, drought combined with the ravages of war had produced one of the worst famines. The Bolsheviks had destroyed the economy as well as their foes. In the face of economic disintegration, riots by peasants and workers, and an open rebellion by previously pro-Bolshevik sailors at Kronstadt changed Lenin's course. The NEP was shrewd and successful both politically and economically. Joseph Duskovsky, later known as Stalin, joined the Bolsheviks in 1903 after engaging in many revolutionary activities in the southern Transcaucasian area during the World War I, including a daring bank robbery to get the money for the Bolsheviks. Stalin succeeded Lenin because Stalin was more effective at gaining the all-important support for the party, the only genuine source of the power in the state. The practical Stalin also won because he appeared better able than the brilliant Trotsky to relate Marxian teaching to Soviet realities in the 1920s. Stalin achieved absolute power between 1922 and 1927. First, Stalin allied with Trotsky's personal enemies to crush Trotsky, expelled from the Soviet Union in 1929 and eventually murdered in Mexico in 1940. The Party Congress of 1927, which ratified Stalin's seizure of power, marked the end of the NEP and the beginning of the era of socialist five-year plans. The first five-year plan had staggering economic objectives. Total industrial output increases by 250%. Heavy industry, the preferred sector, was to grow even faster. Agricultural production was slated to increase by 150%, and one-fifth of the peasants in the Soviet Union were scheduled to give up private plots and join socialist collective farms. Forced collectivization of the peasants led to economic and human disaster. Large numbers of peasants slaughtered their animals and burned their crops in sullen, hopeless protest, and between 1929 and 1933, the number of livestock fell by at least a half. Nor were the state-controlled collective farms more productive. Collectivization created human-made famine in 1932 and 1933. Collectivization was a political victory of the sorts for the Soviet Union government. Regimented and indoctrinated as employees of all-powerful state, the peasants were no longer then a potential political threat to Stalin and the Communist Party. The industrial side of the five-year plans was more successful. The output of industry doubled in the first five-year plan and doubled in the second. No other major country had ever achieved such rapid industrial growth. The two factors contributed to the rapid growth: labor discipline and foreign engineers. Between 1930 and 1932, their power and the government could assign workers to any job and individuals could not move. The aim of Stalin's five-year plan was to create a new kind of society and human personality, as well as strong industrial economy and a powerful army for the state. Once everything was owned by the state, they believed a socialist society and a new kind of human being would inevitably emerge, and this had both good and bad aspects. The most frightening aspect of society was brutal, unrestrained police terrorism, first directed against the peasants after 1929. Terror was increasingly turned on the leading communists, powerful administrators, and ordinary people for no reason. In the early 1930s, the top members of the party and government were Stalin's obedient servants, but there was some grumbling in the party. After Stalin's wife complained at a small gathering in November 1932, she died the same night, apparently by her own hand, and in late 1934, Stalin's number two man, Sergei Kirov, was suddenly and mysteriously murdered. In August 1936, 16 prominent old Bolsheviks confessed to all manner of plots against Stalin in spectacular public trials in Moscow. And then in 1937, lesser party officials, newer henchmen were arrested. In addition to the party members, union officials, managers, intellectuals, army officers, and citizens were struck. Some prisoners were cruelly tortured and warned that their loved ones would also die if they did not confess. Stalin's bloodbath weakened the government army. Others see the terror as an aspect of the fully developed totalitarian state, which must be by its nature always be fighting fighting real or imaginary enemies. Another aspect of life in 1930s was a constant propaganda and indoctrination. Party activists lectured workers in factories and peasants on collective farms, while newspapers, films, and radio broadcasts endlessly recounted achievements. Art and literature became highly political. Life was hard in Stalin's Soviet Union, and massive people lived primarily on black bread and wore old, shabby clothing. Idealism and ideology had a real appeal for many communists who saw themselves heroically building the world's first socialist society while capitalism crumbled. On a more practical level, Soviet workers did receive some important social benefits such as old age pensions, free medical services, free education, and daycare centers. The keys to improving one's position were specialized skills and technical education. Industrialization required massive numbers of trained experts such as skilled workers, engineers, and plant managers. The technical elite joined with the political and artistic elites and new upper class, whose members were rich and powerful and insecure, especially during the purges. Yet the possible gains of moving up outweighed the risks of purges.
Mussolini became a dictator on the strength of Italian rejection of parliamentary government coupled with the fears of the Soviet-style revolution. Some of his dictated supporters pressed for a second revolution, but Mussolini's ministers included moderates and reform-minded socialists. By the end of 1926, Italy was a one-party dictatorship under Mussolini's leadership, but Mussolini did not complete the establishment of a modern totalitarian state. Mussolini's government did not pass radical laws until 1938 and did not persecute Jews savagely until late in the Second World War when Italy was under Nazi control, nor did Mussolini establish a ruthless state police.
Che ignorava la scrittura con la quale tramandare i documenti della propria vita in un tempo in cui Roma aveva Cesare, Virgilio ed Augusto.